and loads of only using 6 words, or you take 5 minutes to reverse engineer. So reverse engineer what's not going to work, and you spend 5 minutes doing that. All the things that definitely won't work. So the next time you're trying to solve a problem, try limiting the things you can use to come up with a solution, or limit the time frame. And you might find that you then have lots of ideas that come up. So those restrictions are things like a time frame, like 5 minutes to write down as many ideas as possible, or reverse engineer. What are the things that are not going to work? It's that kind of thing. That's creating the constraints, creating a rule, if you like, and that's what helps. And you then come up with things that you might not have considered before. Developing a growth mindset. So one common trait that creative people tend to share is that they typically reconceptualize problems more often than less creative people do. So instead of continuing to throw yourself at the same block or the mental wall about something, you try taking a step back and revisit the problem from the very beginning. Is there a different way to think about it? Can you look at the issue from a different angle, and maybe just give yourself the chance to start over with a fresh point of view? And that can lead to more creativity. So this growth mindset that things can keep changing and keep progressing and keep developing. Daydream. So instead of filling every moment with apps and games and goodness knows what else, just let yourself be bored for a bit and see what happens. Just let yourself be bored. So in one study, bored participants performed better on creativity tests than those who were elated, relaxed, or distressed. And in another study, researchers found that boredom gives people time to daydream, and that leads to greater creativity. Boredom encourages creative thinking because it sends a signal that the current situation or environment is lacking, and looking for new ideas and inspiration helps to overcome that. So boredom can be a good thing, daydreaming. And meditation and mindfulness. Yeah, Carol Dweck's done some great stuff on growth mindset. So I don't know whether any of you practice mindfulness or any kind of meditation. There's masses and masses of benefits, but in relation to this in particular, certain types of meditation are linked to an increase in creative thinking. It's long been used as a relaxation technique, but recent research shows that the health benefits go far beyond relaxation. So one study found that using something known as open monitoring meditation, in which the individual is receptive to any and all thoughts and sensations without focusing on any one in particular, can increase this divergent thinking and generation of new ideas. So something to think about. We'll come back to the idea of mindfulness a bit later on in the session, because it links to some other things that I'm going to be talking about. So there you go, some tips to boost your creative thinking skills. And we're going to come back to creativity a bit later on in the session. What we're going to now turn to is the next part of the session, which is what frogs can teach us about critical thinking. What frogs can teach us about critical thinking. So in his book, Think Again, so Adam Grant, who has written a lot about this, he's written a book recently called Think Again, and he talks about frogs and slow boiling pots. So you might have heard that if you drop a frog in a pot of boiling water, it'll jump out right away. But if you put it in lukewarm water and then slowly heat the water up, the frog won't survive. The frog stays there. And the frog's biggest problem here is that it lacks the ability to rethink the situation. Doesn't realize that the warm bath is actually becoming a death trap until it's too late. So he uses this analogy to relate this to humans. Obviously humans smarter than frogs, but this idea of slow boiling pots. So this idea that we can be in this lukewarm water that is slowly heating up and we don't recognize it. So think about how slow people were. I mean, I know it varies in different countries, but generally speaking of the UK anyway, the people were slow to react to warnings about a pandemic. climate change or other things, quite relatively slow. So we often fail to recognize the danger because we're reluctant to rethink the situation. And I know the boiling frog thing, that there's lots of other schools of thought that talk about it being a myth. Yeah, absolutely. But I like to talk about it because it's the idea of the slow boiling pot, right? It's this idea that you can be thinking everything's great and, you know, I'm doing fine and don't need to rethink anything, but actually you're in a slow boiling pot. So rethinking isn't a hurdle in every part of our lives. So we're very happy to refresh our wardrobes. We're very happy to renovate our kitchens, that kind of rethinking. But when it comes to ourselves, our habits, our goals, our identities, we tend to stick to our guns. And that can be a problem when the world is changing. Okay, that can be a really big problem. So just think of it as, you know, this pot that has got lukewarm water that's slowly boiling. Okay, think of it like that. That's the slow boiling pot. So there are certain biases that stop us from changing course. Okay, that actually create an issue when it comes to whether or not we're going to change how we think or what we do. Okay, and these are well-known biases. So the first one is called the first instinct fallacy. And this is a tendency to believe that your first thought, your first idea is closer to the truth than revised thoughts, ideas and answers. So it's a little bit tricky, this one, because we like to go with our gut feeling. Okay, and this is actually saying that the idea that gut feelings or first instincts may not always be right, and that with research and with thinking that actually that we can change that, but we like to go with that first instinct. The second one is desirability bias, and that's our tendency to see only what we want to see. We don't want to see anything else because we're quite fixed on that one thing. Then there's confirmation bias, and that's when we look for information that confirms our pre-existing beliefs. So in other words, if we believe that something is happening, or if we're worried about something, so let's think about it in the sense of being worried about something. So let's say you are very, very worried and concerned about something that's happening in the news or in the world, and that's pretty easy these days. And you start to really, fear it. You will look for information that supports that belief. Okay, that's why it's so dangerous, because you'll look for that information and then you'll be like, oh yeah, absolutely. My fear is being supported. This is actually happening. So confirmation bias will look for information that confirms what we already believe, what we already think. And the last one is called binary bias. And that's really interesting, this one. This is our tendency to seek closure and clarity by simplifying ideas and situations into two categories. And it's how we kind of help to feel better about things. So we'll have very black or white thinking. This is either good or this is bad. This person's either a friend or they're an enemy. So we do that partly to protect ourselves, because we don't want it to be open-ended. But again, that could be dangerous, because that's quite, it's sort of two ways of thinking, and not that there's loads and loads of sort of grey areas in between. So that's a question for you. What are your slow boiling pots? Do you know what they are? Can you think of times when you might have been in a slow boiling pot and maybe you got out of it in time, or maybe you kept stuck to your guns about something? And we do this quite a lot, and we don't like to necessarily change course. And these are the biases that will stop us from changing course. These are the things that will keep us in that pot of lukewarm water that is slowly heating up. So what can we do to reduce that bias? So first of all is to be aware. So be aware when you are starting to think that way. Be aware of it. What is going on? be aware that, oh, maybe I am jumping to conclusions or going with my first instinct. Perhaps I need to think again and look for other ways that this could be approached. Be aware that you're going to be looking for things that confirm your pre-existing belief. That's such a great one, because you're going to look for it, and then you'll be, it's not like there's any shortage of information out there, right? So you will definitely be, get what you want. Definitely get what you want, because it's going to be right there. You'll be able to find it. Doesn't matter what it is. Any belief that you have, any opinion that you have, all you've got to do is a simple internet search, and there'll be loads of stuff that supports that belief. So be aware. Question more. Question others, and question yourself. Challenge yourself. Ask yourself more questions, but challenge what you might be thinking, or challenge that pre-existing belief, knowing that that's a belief. It's not a fact, it's a belief. Okay, so challenge, question. Create more inclusive, this is more to do with work, but create more inclusive meeting practices so that you can actually be listening to diverse views and wanting to kind of know different approaches, different ideas, so that keeps you from being too much fixated on what you want and what you're thinking. So to look for those opportunities to have for diversity in the workplace and in thinking, and then be willing to unlearn. And that's hard, but be willing to unlearn, be willing to say to yourself, okay, that's what I thought was right, but actually maybe it isn't. So be willing to unlearn. And I came across some more, let me just check something a sec, because it might be here. Okay, go back a minute. I'll come back to this in a minute. Okay, so sorry, my mind was just jumping because I found something this morning that I wanted to include in the session. And I'm trying to think when I can make time to include it, so I'm going to do it a bit later. But be willing to unlearn. It is hard, but it's being able to say to yourself, I may be right, but I may not be right, or I have learned. Can I rethink my approach? Maybe I'm wrong. So it's all kind of like humility, being able to kind of, say, actually, I may not have the right answers. Maybe I'm not, maybe I do need to question that a bit more. So I think it's like an inner humility. Okay, so more critical thinking characteristics and what critical thinkers will do. So they are objective, so they're able to recognize biases and try to look at things from a neutral perspective rather than from a biased perspective. They are logical, so maybe a step-by-step approach for assessing something. They are likely to seek evidence, so they take into account facts and data, and they're not relying on feeling or unsubstantiated claims. Okay, so they're looking for that evidence. And collaborative. So getting input from multiple sources and being willing to consider other people's ideas. That's that collaboration that comes in. So they're likely to make better decisions, better business decisions, because they're collecting more information, analysing it, and coming to a logical conclusion. Okay, tips for thinking more critically. So, things that you can do. Think like a scientist. So when you start forming an opinion, resist the temptation to preach your opinion or defend your opinion, because that's quite a strong urge sometimes, that we want to defend our opinion. So resist that urge and try to treat your emerging view a bit like a hypothesis. You're going to test it out with a bit of data. So you're looking here to develop agility to pivot your thinking. So thinking like a scientist, a bit like entrepreneurs will approach their business strategies as experiments. That's how you want to think. Being aware, yes, exactly. Being aware of a different viewpoint doesn't mean acceptance of that viewpoint. Exactly. So it doesn't mean that. It just means that you're listening to someone else's viewpoint. Yeah, you're not validating it. Think about creating learning organizations. So this comes back to the collaborative thinking, to having inclusive meeting practices, that kind of thing, but also striving for better practices. So best practice would suggest that you've already got all the ideal routines in place. Instead, strive for better practices. So in learning cultures, people feel confident that they can question, that they can challenge the status quo. So that means leaders have to role model humility for that to be the case. So creating these learning organizations. Be open to rethinking your own future and what you're doing. So throw out the long-term plan, and maybe, what interested you last year might bore you this year. What confused you yesterday may become exciting tomorrow. So making time to think again. So your calendar might be full of stuff, doing stuff, things that you're doing. Why not schedule time for rethinking and unlearning? What new ideas and opinions are out there? So we're living in an exciting time when really everything that we do can be challenged in some way. This is coming back into what some of you are saying in the chat, but deliberately seeking out information against your own views. So this is not even just being open, but just deliberately seeking out that information that goes against our views. So you can fight confirmation bias by actively engaging with ideas that challenge your assumptions. So follow people who make you think, even if you disagree with them. Yeah, follow them anyway. Get into other people's heads as much as you can. Have empathy. Involve them in decision making. Start understanding how they might view a problem or situation. Yeah, remain open. The other view might be right. Might not be, but might be. And value curiosity and learning. So rather than valuing opinions and judgments, value curiosity. Ask more questions. Learning, mental flexibility, searching for knowledge. So try to learn something new from each person that you meet. Everyone knows more than you about something. Everyone knows more than me about something. So ask better questions, listen more, and question how rather than why. So lots of things there that you can think about. Now, we are going to break shortly, but I just want to add, if you're okay with this, I just want to add a couple more things because I found it this morning and I got really excited because this is from a doctor, and it's 6 ways to get your brain to think smarter. I'm going to see if I can pop the link into the chat. Yes, how can we choose a starting point to learn a subject and what to do to avoid being overwhelmed by all this data? So again, it comes back to what is the source of that information? What is the source of that research? The problem at the moment that we have is that so much comes into us, which is just kind of like breaking news, stuff. It's not even news a lot of the time. It's just breaking news. And it's better if you can go to quality sources. So one of the things that I do, I've got into the habit of doing now, I've actually switched off all news off my phone, any news alerts, all of it, because it was just all breaking news. It wasn't any kind of considered journalism or considered writing. And now I read The Economist. I was reading The Economist before, but I read The Economist, and I find that weekly summary of what is happening is very, very good. So looking for really, really good sources of things that are well established as being really good. Okay. Okay, I'll come back to some more questions a bit later on in the session. So I'm going to come back now to our developing this segment 3, creating a critical and creative thinking mindset. I also just want to touch on the chat. Actually, a couple of things here. You guys have got such great comments and contributions. So walking helps thinking, helps me digest. Yes, so walking while listening to this class, great thing to do. That's why podcasts are so brilliant, because they do help you to internalize things in a slightly different way. Also depends on whether you're an audio learner or a visual learner. I'm an audio learner, so I love podcasts and listening to things. But yes, learning about something in a different way, giving your brain a rest from all the screens is good. Yes, learning a new instrument, learning a new subject, learning a musical instrument, great, yes. has the same effect, because it will strengthen your brain, strengthens that cognitive flexibility. There's some research around music in particular, learning an instrument, that really, really does support strong brains, healthy brains. So all of those things will be good. Okay, let's talk about creating a critical and creative thinking mindset. So let me ask you this. So every moment of the day, and this has come up in the questions as well, you've got lots of stuff, media, stories, scenarios, stuff, okay, coming at you, opinions. So what types of questions could you ask when you get new information? What kinds of questions could you ask when you get new information? And you can pop that into the chat if you want to, or you can just kind of make a note or just reflect. What questions could you ask when you get new information, wherever that information is coming from? Whether it's coming from someone else, something you've read, something you've heard, something on social media. What questions could you ask? Nice. Yes. What is the source? Is this relevant? Is it relevant for me? Where is it coming from? Is this fact or opinion? Oh my gosh, yes, so much is, discerning between fact and opinion. My husband, lovely, lovely man, but he will come out with things and say them so definitively that you believe it. You think, oh, that must, and it's actually just his opinion. It's just his opinion. So yes, fact or opinion. Who gave it to me? Why? Is it anecdotal? All of these things. Okay, so kinds of questions that you could ask. What are good questions? And here are some examples. How do I know? How do I know? So this is all connected with who said this. Watching for all or nothing thinking. So if you hear somebody saying to you, everyone thinks X, or there are always these types of problems going on. Okay, so you look for that kind of language. So I used to run a choir. I don't run it anymore, but I used to run a choir, and lots of people from all different backgrounds in this choir. And I remember regularly I'd have somebody kind of sidling up to me and saying, gosh, you know what, Emissy, nobody's happy about this latest dress code, or, just as an example, no one's happy about it. Everyone's complaining about it. And I would say, when you say everyone, how many people? And it would turn out invariably, this is like a group of 100 people, it would turn out that only 2 people had actually said that about something. So watch out for that language. If someone says to you, everyone thinks this, or nobody believes in X, there's all or nothing thinking. If you delve a bit further, you might find out a bit more. So how do I know? Is there another perspective? Yes, of course there's another perspective. What is it? Yeah. So is there another perspective is a good question to ask. Is there another way of looking at this? What are other ways of looking at this? And maybe reframing that's a very useful skill when you're finding a situation challenging, when you're dealing with something that's a bit upsetting. Reframing, that ability to reframe and think, what are other ways of looking at this situation, is a very valuable one, very, very good one to have. What assumptions have I made? Or what assumptions have you made? What are these assumptions? And think about what they might be. So this can be very, very simple things. My son sends us odd emails and texts all the time from school, and assumes that we've both read them, or that we've both got it, and that we're going to pick him up early, or whatever the message is. So assumptions can happen, just very, very simple things, very, very simple ways. And why? So what are the different things that we can, question something? Why? So is there another perspective? Will be somebody's viewpoint on something, another way of looking at something. And what are other ways of looking at things is a kind of way of reframing a situation. What are the other explanations for this? What are the other plausible factors that might be happening here? So ways that you can ask better questions. Okay, so how can we ask better questions. So one way is to hold your hypothesis loosely. What that means is that if you're too attached to your initial answer, you may refuse to let go no matter where the data leads you. So it's a bit like that first instinct fallacy that we can fall into. But if you hold your view loosely, hold it lightly, don't be too attached to it, then you might be willing to replace it with something else, or not just have quite a tight hold on it. So hold your hypothesis loosely, ask more questions, listen more than you talk. And this sounds simple, but the key to great questions is active listening, really active listening. And that's being able to understand what someone else is saying, both explicitly and implicitly, showing them that you are engaged and interested, and allows you to fully grasp an argument, and it makes it easier to question the logic of an argument, but being open to that. So really that open listening and being willing to accept somebody else's opinion, that we can block things quite easily without realizing it. If it doesn't fit with what we're thinking, we can do that quite easily. Some of the best ways to practice some of this, by the way, is in our immediate surroundings. So our families, our friends, our partners, they're great practice grounds for some of these things. So listening especially can be very challenging with people who are close to us. But listening, simply being present and not speaking as much, allowing them to say what they want to say. Leaving your queries open-ended. So avoid asking yes or no questions. Ask nice, open questions. So you can say, so for example, instead of asking somebody, are you happy? Are you happy in your job? Are you happy in your work? You could ask, what do you love about your job? And what could be better? So it's really these open questions. Just the how, the why, what, those W questions. Not the how is an H, but you know what I mean. And then you can follow that with more questions. So very open-ended questions encourages critical thinking in a group, and it allows people to expand on their viewpoints and leaves people space to actively problem solving. Yeah, it does take brain power. It takes effort to listen actively, takes effort. Consider the counterintuitive. So when you're problem solving, we often quickly might fall into groupthink. So the group, this is very much when you're in a team, the group might converge on a path a bit too quickly, rather than periodically assuring they're headed in the right direction. So the person who can pose the counterintuitive question, the one that challenges the group's conventional thinking, that's the good question to ask. So counterintuitive questions, so it's kind of like playing the devil's advocate a little bit. Stewing in a problem. So this is an interesting one, because this is actually suggesting that we don't react immediately or don't ask questions immediately, but perhaps formulate the question after consideration, after a good night's rest. So literally sleeping on something and then asking the question. So helping ourselves to not be quite so reactive to everything. A deliberate process can often lead to a better conclusion. And then finally, ask the hard follow-up questions. So we can sometimes just accept the easiest answer, or maybe kind of yield to pressures we might feel, or social pressures we might feel. But deep questions that enable critical thinking are often delivered in chains of deeper and deeper follow-up inquiries. So you keep going deeper and deeper into something. So asking thoughtful follow-up questions. And yes, it requires energy to listen and formulate those really good questions. But that is often the only way to deepen your critical understanding of something. So really thinking about how can you tap into asking better questions. So tapping into a creativity mindset. So let's look at how we can do that a bit more. And there are, here are 5 attitudes of creative people. So how could you bring these things into your own day-to-day actions? What could you be doing more? And really, this is about just using these actively. And if you actively use these attitudes, then you'll strengthen that mindset. It's really as simple as that. So don't wait for don't wait until you want to be creative. Don't wait for high stakes situations. Do it every single day, just with things that are going on for you every day. So flexibility. And that's, this is a key mindset, which we've talked about a little bit already, but it's suggesting that there may be more than one single answer or solution to any particular issue or problem. So flexible thinkers are not hemmed in by being overly focused on one way of doing things. And they tend to be open to innovation. They also have the capacity to understand when something's not working and then develop a different approach. So that lovely flexibility, bring that into your day-to-day stuff, things that are going on for you day-to-day. A sense of curiosity. So this is allowing yourself to become a little bit more curious, a bit more fascinated with the world around you. You can do that in simple ways. So you can do it when you're on that daily walk, for example, just noticing things, noticing nature, noticing very simple things, allowing your brain to gravitate towards the very simple, noticing things. But creative thinkers are fascinated with the world around them. They ask lots of questions and they tend to develop a very intense focus, trying to discover how something works, or getting into the detail of a beautiful structure. Anything else you do. So, the next time you're out in a city, you can become curious about a building, a building that's been there for years and years and years, or hundreds of years. Allow yourself to become curious about it. How was it built? All the different intricacies of that building, or all the different intricacies of an object. So build that sense of curiosity on a daily basis by allowing yourself to play around with things a little bit and be with that object or that scenery or that whatever it is, and notice. Positivity. So a positive attitude is really important for thinking creatively, because it's the positivity that spurs the mind on to seek new detail, wonder, and solutions. It's that positivity. So this is linked strongly to the previous point about intense curiosity. So a person who thinks negatively tends to block out stuff. They block out possibilities or other ideas or things that are different to what they might be thinking. And they won't necessarily look at the world around them with wonder or with awe. This is another way of tapping into positivity. Allow yourself to feel awe. So go to a beautiful beach or a beautiful landscape and just be in that and allow that awe to be there. Yeah, work that creative muscle, exercise it like you exercise it for health. Lovely. Do something creative daily. I love that. I love that suggestion. So taking some time to play. Yeah, draw, write, just allow yourself to do that. Even just allowing yourself to doodle in a notebook can just strengthen that creativity. You don't need to have time for the curiosity. You can just allow yourself when you're next there or walking just to notice. Doesn't have to take a long time. So these attitudes don't have to take a long time. It's just about cultivating them. Asking yourself, I wonder if, or gosh, that is really beautiful. And allowing yourself to have that moment. Strong motivation and determination. So this is a little bit different. So this is where the hard work of the creative comes in. We can all have creative thoughts, but what do we do with that? Do we want to show it in a creation or in something that we've constructed? So if you think about creating software solutions for major problems, or creating social capital through community building, or painting a work of art, creativity requires the follow-through, and that can only come from strong motivation and determination. Without this, creative ideas will only reside within the mind of the individual, without having the opportunity to influence things around us. So maybe, taking that a little bit further, allowing yourself to be motivated by your creativity. And remember that creativity can come into anything that you're doing. It's not just about, it can be about music and art and writing, And I would encourage you to delve into those things as well. But it can also be around how you design something in your work, or if you're having to put together a presentation or a meeting, you can be creative with that. You can do different things with that. And the willingness to take risks. So this is an interesting characteristic, because highly creative people tend to believe in the value of the ideas they come up with. So they believe in their ideas. That they are flexible, they're willing to change, but they're not worried about whether their idea is right or wrong, because they believe the idea itself brings value to the field in which it resides, even if it's discounted later. So that's why they're not, creative people are not afraid to kind of like, hey, I'm going to put my idea out here. What about this? Why don't we think about it in this way? So they will happily do that. But taking risks also means being willing to try something, do it differently, and if it fails, you try a different approach and just keep trying out different things. So these are the core attitudes of creative people, and this is to encourage you to think about bringing these things into your everyday, so that you're doing these things in low stakes situations. As somebody said, there's opportunities to be curious all around you. I am going to, before I go into the next section, I'm just going to pop into the Q&A and see if there's anything else here. I like that. So we've got here, stew in a problem would be akin to chewing on something or simmering in one's own juice. Very vivid description here. But yes, it is. It's kind of like allowing yourself to sit with a problem. We don't like doing that because we kind of want to come up with we want to react to it, or we want to come up with a solution. But allowing yourself just to be, let it be. Think, I'm going to put that I'm not going to put it to one side, but I'm going to let it be, sleep on it. So it's kind of like chewing it over, a little bit like chewing it over, and then see what happens after a little bit of time has gone by. But that's a nice little analogy that you've got there. I like that. And then there's another one here, brain games. Do brain games help effectively acquire attention, language, memory, problem solving, focus, mental agility? Well, yes, they do. Absolutely. All those things. There are some great resources out there for brain games. They do help you to actively strengthen those different kinds of skills. So because you have to focus your attention, your memory, and especially your working memory is being strengthened. So your ability to hold different amounts of data in your short-term memory, your focus, your mental agility. So these things can strengthen those parts of our brain, definitely. Yeah, those things are really good. And one more here. When to stop